Okay.
To szanowni państwo, bardzo, bardzo, bardzo was serdecznie witamy.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you very, very warmly at another webinar that is devoted to very serious and very important matters related to the war in Ukraine and everything that's happening there at that time, caused by this absolutely unfathomable suffering of all the people are suffering, and all those emotions that are gathering there among the people of Ukraine, also in migrants. Today we have Robert Leahy, a fantastic lecturer, professor, who's going to introduce us into the subject of understanding those feelings that are imminent in light of such enormous, unfathomable trauma. So thank you, Professor, for being with us. We are very grateful for taking care of the entire scheme of the entire program. You've been so proactive, pro-social at every single step. So big, big thanks to you, Professor, once again. And obviously, we'd like to warmly welcome everybody, all the participants of this webinar. Thanks for being with us, willing to actually delve deeper into those incredibly difficult topics. Joanna is going to give you a couple of words, and we'll then give the floor to Professor Lee. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you again, and as well, together with the EGA, we'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Academy of Motivation and Education involved that got embarked on this journey in collaboration with Mr. Professor. Now, we've been educating future psychotherapists. We really want to make them sensitive to whatever is happening and invite them to this actually to this very specific cooperation, because actually people selflessly want to become involved in helping migrants in this very difficult situation, because people are in need and will still be in need of mental support. So the more we know about it, the more professional our support will be in taking care of the people that we will assist. But that means we'll also obviously take care of ourselves. Our strength must suffice for long. And the more we take care of ourselves, the more competent we are while providing the support to the people in need. Hence, the importance of similar training courses as this one. So again, thanks for being with us. And I suppose that's the right time and high time that we provided the floor to you, Professor. The floor is yours, Professor.
Dzięki bardzo.
Should I start, Iga? Okay.
Absolutely, yes, yes, yes. You're very welcome, and thank you very much. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in this program that Inga and your colleagues have organized. And I think currently we have 28 lectures scheduled, including the ones that have already been given. And it's actually a great honor to be part of this, to be able to participate in this program. It gives me a feeling that even if I'm contributing in a small way, I'm not completely helpless. So the people who are refugees are going through living hell, feeling that their world has completely fallen apart and that they'll never be able to get it back together. Almost the feeling like the world has gone insane and that you are going insane. People have lost their loved ones, or they're worried about what's going to happen to their loved ones. their husbands, their wives, their mothers, their fathers, their children. People are separated from their loved ones, and this is part of the emotional experience that so many millions of refugees go through. According to the United Nations, 2 years ago, worldwide, there were 85 million refugees and displaced people worldwide. Many refugees from the Middle East, from Syria, Yemen, Africa, parts of Asia, Venezuela in Latin America. Just refugees and displaced people are part of everyday life for 85 million people. So Ukraine right now is a place where we have millions of refugees who have escaped to another country, to Poland and Moldova and Romania and Germany and other countries. But you also have people who are displaced within Ukraine who are not able to stay in their homes and have to go to another place to live, sometimes to bomb shelters. The feeling that refugees have, or people who go through trauma, is that they have feelings and experiences that they think nobody can understand. It's almost like the violinist who's playing a melody and a sad song, but nobody can hear it. It's a very difficult thing to feel like your world is falling apart and that you feel hopeless about the future and that nobody can understand the emotions, the experiences that you've had. There's a feeling of complete chaos, that the world is turned upside down and that you'll never be able to get your life back together. And we can see that a lot of art reflects the sense of insanity, of feeling alone, not understood, chaos. So this is part of human experience. So whenever we think about emotions, we want to think about the context. What are we talking about? What are people going through? What are Ukrainian refugees going through, or refugees from Syria or Yemen or any country? Well, for Ukraine, it's an unprovoked attack by Russia. Feeling that you've been living close to Russia forever, and now a country that many of you have relatives in is now trying to kill your citizens and destroy your cities. We have the context of civilians being bombed. So usually in wars, it's the armies that fight each other, but what's happened in Ukraine is that hospitals, schools, universities, train stations have been targeted. So this is part of the horror and terror that the people who are not soldiers are being killed. Mass graves in Mariupol that have been discovered. The context is the siege of your major cities, of Kyiv until recently, and Mariupol, and probably soon Odessa and Kharkiv and other cities that have, almost like from the Middle Ages, trying to starve people out. The context is a sense of death and destruction throughout most of the country, that whenever you look at a map of Ukraine, you can imagine that artillery shells are being fired and bombs are being dropped and people are being killed. An important part of the context is that the whole world is watching, that unlike World War II, where over the course of 6 years, 35,000 people died every year. I mean, every day in World War II. 35,000 people died every day for 6 years, many of them who were not soldiers, who were not military. Many, many millions of civilians died as a result of the war. But during World War II, you had to wait a week to see a film of what the destruction looked like. Here, we get it instantaneously. We can see on television or on streaming video of bombs falling or children running in the street or dead bodies. So we have all of this trauma and horror and viciousness being seen worldwide every day. The refugee experience, the loss of your home. Many people, I think 1/4 of the people in Ukraine are not able to live in their homes. The loss of family members, not only the men who are mainly the combat forces for Ukraine, but women and children, family members, your parents being killed, your children being killed, your relatives being killed. Another part of the refugee experience is the loss of finance, that people leaving the country, not having enough money to live on, not being able to get access to their money. For many people, the loss of jobs, that the economy has collapsed. There's been a dramatic decrease in the economy in the past 2 months, dramatic decrease in the economy. The feeling of being a stranger in a strange land. So even though there's been great generosity and kindness shown by people in Poland and Romania and throughout Europe, there's a sense in which I'm a stranger here. I don't know the language. I don't know my way around. I don't know what to do. There's uncertainty about the future. So 3 months ago, the refugee, the Ukrainian individual might have been going along in a very predictable life, going to work every day, taking care of their family, engaged in leisure activities, visiting people. Now everything seems uncertain. And we know when people have uncertainty, they're very likely to feel anxious. There's also a sense of what's called moral injury, that this is not simply a terrible thing, like getting cancer or losing a limb in an accident. This is where you feel that what's happening to you is malicious and evil and wrong, and that makes you feel extremely angry, wanting to get revenge, feeling like the world doesn't make sense. And for some, it may lead people to question their religion. Why has God allowed this to happen? This is very common during times of war. A famous Jewish theologian once said about this at Auschwitz, do you still believe in God? And he said, I saw that they killed God at Auschwitz. I saw God hanging. So there's that moral injury, and that may lead some to question their faith, questioning the meaning of life, the fairness of life. And then there's the trauma, the sudden horrible things that have happened. and that are continuing to happen. Let's keep in mind that this is not necessarily something in the past. This is something that goes on every day, and we don't know when it will stop. So this is the refugee experience, or a small snapshot of what people go through. And you can imagine if this were you or somebody you loved, a family member, your husband, your wife, or your children. So what are the emotions during time of war? And unfortunately for humans, war has been part of everyday life. And this is the largest land war in Europe since 1945. So that's 77 years ago, the largest land war. But we've had wars throughout the world since 1945. But this now is close to home for Ukraine, for Poland, Romania, Germany, all the countries in Europe. And as a result, we think about the emotions that people have during this horrible crisis, this terrible war. One, of course, is anger. And I can tell you, every day I feel angry about this. Every day I am outraged. I am really pissed off that Russia has done this. So our colleagues who are helping refugees and the people you help are going to experience a lot of anger. And that anger may come out in ways that make no sense at times. There's a lot of anxiety, and how could you not feel anxious? You worry, you feel tense, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't digest your food. You're anxious because you're thinking the world is threatening. Look at what's happening around me. Many people are going to feel numb. They're going to feel no feeling for a while, which is very common for people going through traumatic experience, a sense of shutting down, and even wanting to shut down, to turn off the emotion, sometimes feeling like the world is not real around me. So experiencing dissociation, like I don't feel I'm real. I don't feel this is real. This is a very common experience. And some people, when they have that feeling of numbness, or that feeling that things around me don't feel real, or I don't feel like I'm connected, some people feel very afraid that maybe they're going insane, but we need to normalize these very difficult experiences. Of course, sadness is part of the experience. As I've said, for many people, there's a loss of almost everything. As my colleague John Markowitz said last week, there's a loss of roles that you're in, the role of being, having a job, of being a father or a mother, or things that you had before, connections with people, the lives of people, the losses that you have. Sadness is a very natural part of this experience. There's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness that, the world is going to be horrible going forward. I will never be able to be happy again. And then there's the feeling of guilt, the feeling of, should I be there? Should I be back in my country, back in my home? Should I be out fighting? Did I leave somebody behind? Did I do everything that I could have done? So these are the emotions that we know so many people have. And many of these are natural emotions, very natural emotions. But there are also what I would call problematic ways of coping. There are adaptive ways of coping, and then there are problematic ways of coping. So one way in which some people cope is to isolate themselves from other people, to pull away from other people. I don't want to be around anybody. Part of that is also avoidance, avoiding doing things, pulling back into your shell. And we know that avoidance and isolation predict depression, because when you're avoiding and isolating, you're not experiencing rewarding positive behaviors. And as you begin to avoid and isolate, you begin to ruminate and worry. The rumination is where you dwell on ideas like, I can't believe this is happening, or what went wrong, or why is this going on? Or you are more likely to worry when you isolate and avoid. You begin focusing on your internal thoughts, and you worry about the future, which I talked about last week, on how to handle and cope with worry. You're more likely to drink or use drugs when you are traumatized. And we know that from the research on people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, or people exposed to life-threatening trauma, that drinking and drug use make recovery much more difficult. But the reason why people do that is they want to get rid of those emotions. They're frightened of those emotions. They cannot accept them. They cannot tolerate them. And that's because many of us have beliefs about emotion. I call these emotional schemas or emotion beliefs. And there are lots of different ways in which we can think about our emotions currently. One is the duration. Will my feelings go on forever? So how long will my emotions last? And of course, if you think that your sadness and your anger and your anxiety will go on forever, you're more likely to feel depressed and anxious. Another thought is that I have no control over the way I feel. And again, what we know is that when people think they have no control, they feel more anxious and depressed. And I'll describe later how we can challenge these negative views of your emotion, even though these emotions seem very legitimate and very real in the current situation. Some people may feel guilty about their emotions. For example, some refugees may feel guilty that they're actually having a good time. They're enjoying themselves. Maybe they're staying with a family in Poland or elsewhere in Europe, and they're enjoying themselves. They're having a good time, and they're playing with their children. They have their dog or their cat. They made some new friends, and they think, do I have a right to these feelings when other family members are risking their lives fighting against the Russian invaders? Sometimes we believe that our emotions are incomprehensible. They don't make sense. And that, so why do I feel the way I feel? Why do I feel numb? Or why do I feel such anxiety? I'm in a safe place now. Why do I feel so frightened? Some people believe that their emotions are unique to them, that no one else feels the way that I do. No one else feels the way that I do. I'm all alone. Some people think I cannot tell people how I feel, and I'll describe later why people think that. But being able to share your emotions and be connected into an interpersonal support world is very, very key to getting through trauma and the difficulties. Some people think that nobody can validate me. Nobody could understand or care about the way I feel. And some people think that I have mixed feelings. I feel upset, but I feel a bit relieved because here I am staying with a nice family and getting food and I feel safe. But I also feel angry and anxious. How could I feel good and bad at the same time? To think about, I said, one of the things to keep in mind is that according to the United Nations, there are 85 million refugees 2 years ago. In other words, the refugee experience, as horrible as it might be, is something that literally tens of millions of people go through. Or let's even say the immigrant experience. Like, let's say you decide to move permanently to Poland or to Germany or France or the United Kingdom or the United States. There are millions of immigrants. In fact, the United States has more immigrants than any country in the world. We have 55 million people in the United States were born in another country. The country with the second most number of immigrants is Germany, with about 15 million. So we have immigrants who move to other countries and decide to stay and then make a life for themselves. And many of them succeed and they get good work. For example, in Poland, there's a labor shortage of 200,000 that they need to get 200,000 new workers in Poland. And I suspect that many of the people who are have moved from Ukraine to Poland may actually be able to get those jobs. Well, how can we help? I think the first thing to do when somebody's going through a difficult time is to validate them. Now, what does it seem like? Well, validation is finding the truth in what somebody is feeling. So finding of course, you feel angry. Look at what Russia is doing to you. Of course, you feel anxious. It makes sense of your emotion. You feel anxious because the world seems to be turned upside down. But we also can try to help people recognize that it might be possible that whatever they're feeling now could be temporary. And I don't mean to invalidate somebody by saying you're feeling horrible now, but let's think about other ways that you might feel in the future. And we can explore other possible emotions, such as curiosity, feeling challenged, opportunities for exploration, or even opportunities for love and kindness and even gratitude. It's hard to imagine that you're a refugee and you've been chased out of your country by an invading army, and now we expect you to have gratitude. Well, gratitude is something that you can imagine having if you are grateful that you're alive, or grateful that your loved ones are alive, or grateful that you have people in this new place that are supportive. But it's very difficult to feel gratitude during this time. But one thing I can tell you is that many people who leave a war zone and go to a new place eventually express a lot of gratitude for the people who helped rescue them. One thing that validation does when people feel their emotions are understood and cared for by others is that the validation reduces their guilt and their shame, that you have a right to the way you feel. But we also want to eliminate those problematic ways of coping. That we can't really help people with their emotions if they're relying too much on alcohol and drugs and avoidance. One way of thinking about validation is to stand back and imagine if this were you. Imagine if you were going through this. This is something I try to think about because here I am in New York, I'm safe. I have food. I have my cat over here. My wife will be back in a few hours. How can I imagine if this were me? Well, I think watching what's happening, and I say, imagine this happened to me or somebody I loved. This would be heartbreaking. I would be enraged, just like the refugee you're talking to. Think about the failures in trust that these people have experienced. They trusted that they would be protected. They, may be hard to say they trusted Russia, but they didn't expect that they would be attacked. When you're validating a client, you need to kind of notice what their voice sounds like, their nonverbal expression, how they move their body, where they hesitate, and notice where that emotion is. Use your own feelings to validate. Imagine it's you, and then use the feelings that you can imagine having, that you would be as upset, if not more upset than they are. But also to respect what they are currently experiencing. That as much as I try to help them feel somewhat better, I have to respect that this is where they are right now. And also to accept that as much as I try to show empathy and compassion, I'm going to fail for right now, because it takes a while for people to be able to accept the empathy. The ideal validation encourages people to express their emotion. So periodically asking the client, tell me how you're feeling. Reflect that their emotions, their experience reflects pain and suffering. It sounds like you're going through a very, very difficult time and you're in a lot of emotional pain. To normalize what they're going through, that this is how many people would feel. This is a normal thing to feel upset. To differentiate and expand emotion. What other emotions do you feel beside hopeless? You might feel sad, might feel anxious, might feel challenged, might have thoughts that maybe there are things that I can do to make my life better. And link the emotions to higher values, that you feel angry because you think it's wrong for people to attack innocent people. You feel anxious about your loved ones because you love your loved ones. To respect the moment, an ideal validation is to recognize that this is the way the person feels right now. To recognize that pain comes and goes, that you're feeling great pain right now, and I accept that and I understand how hard that is. But also to think, I can also imagine that some of that might come and go, but it's very real right now. And then to reflect the limits of my validation, that no matter what I say to you at this moment in time, you still are going to feel very, very upset. So we can think about the beliefs that people have about their emotions. So I left this one blank. This is the traumatic event and all of the emotions that I described, the anger, the numbness, the anxiety, the hopelessness. And so the thing is to pay attention to these emotions and even label them. I am feeling angry, I am feeling anxious, and to expand, to differentiate as many emotions as I'm feeling. Now, what we would love to see is the person to realize these emotions are normal. This is the way people feel when they're traumatized. and to accept that I feel this way right now. As horrible as it is, this is what I feel right now. To be able to express those emotions and share them, to experience validation, to have a loving, kind listener who says, I hear you, I'm here for you, I'm here to put my arm around you. To link these emotions to needs and values, you need to be connected with the people you love. You need to be treated with respect and to learn from the experience. But some people, when they go through a traumatic experience, sometimes they learn what really matters in life. And what really matters in life is being alive and being connected to loved ones and having a purpose. But there are other ways in which people cope with the difficult emotions. Now, some people have a hard time labeling the emotion. And we know that people who have a hard time labeling emotion have a difficult time coping with emotion. So some people engage in emotional avoidance. They pull away. They want to get rid of the emotion. They want to suppress it. So they dissociate, they binge, they drink, they use drugs to become numb because they're afraid that they're going to lose control and that the emotions are going to last a long time. Because they have these negative interpretations of their emotions. They feel guilty or ashamed. They think others would never feel the way they do. They might think I should only feel one way. They believe their emotions don't make sense. They cannot accept their emotion. And some people actually think they should always be rational and never have emotions. But the reality of it is that sometimes we need to be in a place where we can fall apart before we can be put back together. Because these people who have these views that emotions are problematic are going to then use avoidance and all of these other things. And they're more likely to ruminate and worry and blame others and avoid situations and so forth. So this is the model of emotional schemas that I've developed. But we can address some of these using some cognitive behavioral techniques. So what we want to do is we want to help people realize that their emotions are temporary, that you do have control. Your emotions are going to depend on what you do. Now, if you're engaged in pleasurable activity, you're going to have different emotions than you will if you're ruminating and worried. We can think about how emotions make sense. That's such an important part of the validation, that they're universal. People everywhere feel these emotions. To reduce the guilt and the shame, to help you tolerate mixed feelings, to help tolerate having a range of feelings, to help you accept that you feel bad for now, and that's real and that is true, but still you can commit to actions and link your emotions to your values. So emotions are multifaceted. In other words, we have many emotions. Sometimes we have a surface emotion, but underneath it we have another emotion. Emotions are linked to networks of emotion. Anxiety is linked to anger and sadness and shame, sometimes, and humiliation and frustration. So we need to think about how we expand the person's experience of emotion. It's not to get rid of the bad emotions. It's to build a larger range of emotions. So thinking about what other emotions do you have beside these troublesome emotions? For example, if you didn't feel angry, what emotion would you have? You might feel anxious. So anger gives us a sense of control. I'm going to do something. Anxiety is a feeling of out of control. What would be the opposite of anger or anxiety? It might be the emotion of feeling safe and calm. When do you think other emotions might show up? So, for example, you're feeling anxious right now. When do you think calmness will show up? When do you think pleasure will show up? When do you think love will show up? I like to think about the emotions as a range of different possibilities that we might have. So example, I might feel angry because he insulted me. I would feel anxious that people will think less of me. I would feel sad because I'll lose all my friends. So sometimes if we dig, if I felt angry, what emotion would I have underneath that? Could be anxiety. What emotion do I have underneath that? Could be sadness. So emotions are like layers of an onion. So emotions are part of psychopathology, and our beliefs about emotion are part of it. So people with eating disorders want to get rid of a sense of emptiness or loneliness. People with substance abuse want to get rid of their emotions. All of the anxiety disorders are fears of having anxiety. A fear of intimacy. I don't want to get close to somebody because I can get hurt. A fear of rejection, a fear of loss. All of these are fears of having emotion. But in order to have a life, we have to recognize that having difficult and painful, even horrible experiences is part of a complete life. What does the person think about their emotion? What do they think they should do? So you feel sad, you become confused about, I don't know why I feel sad. You feel helpless about your sadness. You have all these negative thoughts about your sadness. And then you think your sadness is going to last forever. It's going to overwhelm you. You'll lose control. Your sadness begins to isolate. You feel hopeless, and then you avoid and isolate. So this circle of sadness and negative evaluations of sadness perpetuates a negative cycle. Sadness builds on sadness. But we can modify these beliefs. So one way we can do this is to universalize an emotion, that everybody feels sad, everybody feels angry, everybody feels hopeless at times, everybody feels a little crazy too. So we need to normalize our emotions. You are not alone, you are part of the human spirit. We can show loving kindness toward yourself. So I was telling a person recently that she was very critical of herself for having anxiety. So I said, put your arms around yourself and imagine that you're loving yourself and calming yourself and saying, I'm going to take care of myself. You can imagine trying that right now, showing loving kindness toward yourself rather than criticizing you. So making these emotions universal, we all have them, and making them human. Now think about, some people think I'm all alone, no one would understand. So you can explore this. What feelings do you think other people don't have? Sadness, anger, hopelessness. If someone else had these feelings, what would you think of them? Would you think they're weak? Would you think they're, not worthwhile? Or would you show kindness and support and understanding? Why do you think we have so many plays or movies or stories that are about emotion? It's because we love the validation we get when we know how somebody else has coped with emotion. We like to find out that other people have the same feel. Oh, I know I'm not alone. I know I'm not the only person going through this. 85 million refugees and displaced people worldwide every year, and more now. Is it normal to be upset, to have fantasies, to have fears? Of course it is. Look around you. If you feel ashamed of your feelings, you think that your feelings show weakness as opposed to humanity, are you afraid to share these with people? And as a result, you never find out people around you have had many of the same emotions that you've had. Have others felt this way? Yes. And they still do, and they will in the future. This is part of human experience. What we know, and again, not to minimize what's happened, but what we know from the work on traumatic experience is that a year after terrible life experiences, like the traumas of war, losing a limb, a serious injury, financial loss, a loss of a marriage, a loss of a loved one. 1 year later, 85% of the people are back at their level of happiness and well-being before the negative event. So obviously, what's going on right now feels very real, but it may be that a year from now, many things may have changed and many people may cope better than they thought they would. So I mentioned earlier that we want to look at the problematic coping strategies and explore them and hope to eliminate them if we can, because those get in the way of getting past the difficult emotions. This is a model of coping with emotion from one of my books, and there are problematic strategies like avoidance and trying to suppress the emotion. You try to suppress an emotion, just bounces back. Or trying to distract yourself, you can do that, but you can't live a life based on distraction. Or worry and rumination. That's a very common way in which people think, if I can figure out everything and make sense of everything, then I won't be anxious. So this temporarily suppresses emotion, but then it bounces back. So these strategies are problematic, but there are other strategies that are very helpful. So a very helpful one is social support. So having people around you who maybe new people around you, but family members and other people that you meet, the community you meet, for social support. That's a major, major part of getting better. Activating your behavior, engaging in positive activities, such as work or, doing things that are constructive or helping other refugees or helping other people. Trying to think about it differently, cognitive restructuring. Maybe this is not going to go on forever. Maybe it seems catastrophic, but there's still things that you can do. Or problem solving. What are the problems you need to solve? Find a place to live, maybe get work, learn a language, reconnect with people from my community. Reduce your arousal using meditation, relaxation, acceptance, accepting where you are, but committing to action, accepting that it's difficult for now, but I'm going to try my best to cope and make things better. And modify the way you think about emotions. So you begin thinking about emotions as normal, as part of human experience, as they make sense, that they're validating, that you validate yourself, and that your emotions you can have control of your emotion rather than suppress them. So one thing is to listen to your emotion. If the emotion could speak, what would it say? So somebody might say, my anger could speak, it would be, I want to kill Putin. All right, I can understand that. I can understand that you'd feel that way. That's what the emotion is telling you. It's telling you to do something. It would tell you to do something, but you're not in a position to make that happen. So if your emotion was a sense of helplessness, a sense of frustration, it would say, I can't do anything to make life better. But we can look at that. Are there things that you can do to make life better? And we'll look at some of those. So loneliness tells us I will always be alone. I need to find someone. But I think that these emotions also say something good. What loneliness says is I like being connected to people. And I think loneliness is a positive emotion, even if it's a painful emotion. It means you're the kind of person who likes to connect. Anger, I need to take revenge. Can't let them get away with this. That's also could be a positive emotion. That means that you won't let people treat you this way. You believe in fairness and that you will treat people fairly. And so with envy and jealousy and sadness, all of these emotions tell you to do something, and many of them are connected to values. There are certain events that trigger our emotion. People, like seeing other people going through what we're seeing, or seeing people on television, like Russian troops, or places, maybe seeing pictures of Kharkiv or Kiev or Lviv or Mariupol or Odessa. Events, anniversaries, these are reminders. People may find themselves trying to avoid any reminder of their emotion, which is understandable. You don't want to be sitting there 8 hours a day looking at pictures of the war. Some people think I need to avoid, but we want to find a balance. You don't want to spend all your time, but you can't live in a world where you're sealed off from reality. So some emotions carry with them certain ways of thinking. When you're anxious, it makes you think this is catastrophic. This is awful. Keep in mind, there are 85 million refugees. Of course, not all of them are going through the hell that Ukrainians are going through. Or fortune telling, you feel anxious and sad. What are you saying to yourself? You're saying the future will be filled with loneliness and bad things happening to me. Keep in mind, there are 55 million immigrants in the United States, 55 million. There are 15 million immigrants in Germany. There are millions of immigrants throughout the world. Those are people who have made a new life for themselves. There's all or nothing thinking. Everything is bad. Well, you're around people who care for you. You have food, you have safety. Labeling yourself, I'm helpless. Are you really? Maybe there's still some things you can do. Or discounting the positive. Yes, I'm alive and have people around me, but I don't have what I had before. That may be true, but what you have now is very important. So we often feel that our negative emotions are going to go on forever. They're going to last indefinitely, and this makes us more anxious and depressed. So think about, you have feelings that things are going to last for a long time. Have you had that thought before? Think about in the past, before the war, did you feel hopeless about something, and did that change? All of us have probably had some of the feelings that refugees have: anger, anxiety, sadness, hopelessness, moral outrage. Many of us have had those feelings, but feelings tend to be temporary. Why did they end? Why did your hopelessness end? Well, because you found that there were people that you did care about, or there were things that you did like, or that you began having new goals. And it may be that strong feelings go up and down. If you had a strong feeling in our session talking, would you think it would go on forever? What if you thought some of these emotions might be temporary? So we need to find variability. So think about, identify 6 emotions. You can have the client, 6 emotions, 6 positive and 3 positive and 3 negative. 3 positive emotions might be love, happiness, pleasure. 3 negative could be anxiety, hopelessness, anger. And then keep track of these emotions every hour of the week. So after this talk, what are you going to do? You might have dinner, or you might get together with family members or friends. What emotions do you think you'll have then? So keeping track of these emotions and rating them every hour of the week. And what you find is that your emotions change with what you do and who you're with and what you're thinking. When are you more likely to have the negative emotions? You're more likely to have the negative emotions when you're ruminating about all the terrible things. When are you likely to have the positive emotions? When you're focused on taking care of your family and you're, interacting with new people, or you're talking about other things, or you're eating food, or you're playing with your dog or your cat. Your emotions vary their time of day or night. So many people, some people have early morning negative feelings. Many people have nighttime negative feelings. Um, Many people notice that their negative emotions are stronger when they're alone, or when they're not doing things, they're not active, or they're engaged in lots of negative thinking. So if my emotions vary, if they change with all of these different things, what I'm doing, who I'm with, what I'm thinking, what I'm planning on doing, then maybe I have some control of these emotions. Some people believe their emotions will go out of control and they'll go insane. So you can think about, one way of thinking about this is to use the mindfulness idea from Rumi's The Guest House, that each emotion is a guest that comes and visits and tells me something that is important for me, but the guest comes and then the guest leaves. Or I can think about riding the wave, like this surfer. I'm going to be riding the wave of my sadness for a while, and then eventually I'll get to the beach. Or I can improve the moment. I can do other things that are pleasurable. Maybe I can take a hot bath, or I can play with my pet, or I can, work on some project that's important to me, or I can listen to music. So you can use some of these DBT techniques to help you find that the emotion is temporary and you do have control. So you can look at different things that lead to changes in the emotion that I mentioned before, such as what I'm doing, who I'm with. You can point to the emotion. There's my sadness. That is my sadness. Not I am sadness. That's my sadness. And what we know is that by viewing our sadness as there rather than me, you have more control and you feel less hijacked or absorbed. We can make room for the emotion. Yes, I have sadness, but I'm going to have other things in my life beside that sadness, and I will make room for that sadness. My life is large enough that it can contain that sadness. We can think about ourselves as observing the emotion. We can observe it. There it is. There's my sadness. We can imagine ourselves floating. I'm floating here, and my sadness is floating over here. Or you can imagine the sadness as something on top of a piece of wood floating down the river. These are mindful detachment exercises that we can use to kind of step away from that emotion, notice it and let it go, notice it and let it go, moment to moment. Let's take a break for about 5 minutes, and we will come back and I will continue with the rest of the talk. Thank you.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
So Iga, if people have questions, they can put them in chat. Hello?
Yes, I have just written what you said in chat that so everybody
Okay.
knows about that. Mhm.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. So
Mhm.
I can maybe leave a few minutes at the end for people who have questions. Okay. Okay, I think I'm going to continue, if that's okay with people. Um,
I'm ready.
okay, good. All right. Okay. So many people believe that they have to get rid of the emotion immediately. I've got to get rid of all of my sadness, all of my anger, all of my anxiety. But trying to get rid of the feeling makes that feeling too important to us. So one way of thinking about emotions is to normalize whatever emotion you're having, anger, anxiety, numbness, and to say, some of that is true, some of that's part of being human. I don't need to get rid of every negative emotion. Maybe I need to make room for them rather than try to control it and suppress it. Some people think if I don't get rid of the anxiety, I'll go crazy. And if everybody feels anxious at times, does that mean everybody is crazy? Some people think that if I don't control my emotions, I won't be able to control my actions. But you can have an emotion of anger, but not go out and kill somebody. You can have an emotion of sadness, but not jump out the window. So making a distinction between having an emotion and taking an action is important. We can also think about how we can help clients accept their emotion, accept that I feel sadness right now, accept I feel lonely right now. As I said, sometimes we need to think about what we think about as negative emotion as pointing to positive value. So let's say you're lonely, you miss your partner, you miss your friends. What's positive about that? Well, in my view, loneliness means that you value connection. You value the people in your life who matter to you. And that seems to be a positive thing. We want to have the capacity to miss people. I mean, if you had nobody in your life, you would not miss anybody. Some people think if I accept an emotion, it won't go away. So, one way of thinking about that is one of the techniques I use with worry, the anxious worry that people have. Like, let's say the worry that I'll never fall asleep. And I think that we may have a speaker at some point who will discuss sleep problems that are going to be very common. But one technique that I use, like a lot of times when people think, oh my God, I'll never fall asleep, is that they then really try hard to fall asleep. get to sleep. I got to get to sleep now. Let me count to 100. Let me count sheep. Let me, think about all the good things. And so their mind is active, really trying to fall asleep. But falling asleep is literally falling. It's like losing. It's like, oh, I was reading and I fell asleep. I wasn't trying to fall asleep when I was reading, but when I was reading, I fell asleep. But what we know is that when people try to fall asleep, what's called sleep effort, the amount of effort they put into falling asleep, they're more likely to have insomnia. So here's the acceptance technique that I use. I call it the boredom technique. Now, I'll describe it, but let's imagine you had a fear of the elevator. How would I help you cope with the fear of the elevator? Well, I would have you get on the elevator over and over and over. The first time you get on the elevator, oh my God, I'm so anxious. The elevator is going to fall. I'll get stuck in the elevator. I won't be able to breathe, right? But you get on the elevator up and down, and the anxiety begins to go down. And finally, after the 50th time you're going up and down in an elevator, you're beginning to get so bored, you even feel annoyed with the idea that you're doing it. So here's how the boredom techniques works. Let's imagine you trying this right now. Imagine that you have your eyes closed and you're lying in bed and you have that thought, I'll never fall asleep. And of course, what you usually do is you try to fall asleep. But now what I'm going to do is simply repeat that thought over and over. So I want you to stay with me on this. I'll never fall asleep. 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 So in the chat function, if you found yourself getting sleepy, type in the word yes and just send it to everybody. Got a lot of sleepy people. A lot of sleepy people. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of sleepy people. So the boredom technique works. And I've used the boredom technique with lots of different people, like a patient who had the thought, I could have cancer and I'll die. I could die from cancer. And what I had him do is to repeat that. I could have cancer and I could die from cancer. And he would repeat it over. I said, I want you to do this very slowly, 200 times a day. And he said it became so boring that the thought itself was boring. It no longer made him anxious, just made him bored. I had a patient who had jealousy thoughts that his wife could cheat on him. And he would get carried away thinking about it. And I had him practice the boredom technique. I had him practice lots of different techniques. And he said the most useful technique for him was the boredom technique. My wife could always cheat on me, and I would never know it or whatever. So the boredom technique could be something that you could use, that maybe I'll never get back to my country. Maybe I'll never, I mean, that sounds horrible, but in some ways, people say, well, can you tell me I will get back to my country? Can you tell me I will be safe? We can't promise that. We don't know for sure what's going to happen. We think you'll be able to get back. We think you're going to be safe. But sometimes accepting something that's bad as simply, all right, that's something that could happen. Anything could happen. And what I need to do is I need to, rather than constantly ruminate and worry about it, maybe what I need to do is to accept it. So tonight I want you to practice, I'll never fall asleep. Okay? All right. Sometimes people have a thought, I can't accept a feeling such as, let's say, anger or the desire for revenge, because that means I'm a bad person. No, it means you're a human person. And keep in mind that an emotion or a thought is not the same thing as behavior. That you can have thoughts of revenge, but that doesn't mean you carry them out. So I think about, some people think about humans as having a higher and lower self. I don't think that way. I think that human beings are filled with lots of emotions, painful ones, happy ones, boring ones. It's all true. It's all true. And what we need to think about is that the happy face and the sad face is the same person. One way of thinking about coping with your emotion is changing your goals. So I remember years ago, I was the president of an organization. I was trying to get my colleagues to follow a certain course of action, and I got a lot of opposition. And what I noticed is that I was getting more and more angry because I was so focused on my goal. I've got to get them to do what I want. And then I thought, what if I made myself into a patient? And I thought, what if I don't have that goal? I have to get them to do what I want. No, I don't have to get them to do what I want. I mean, this organization never did what I was asking them to do. So why should it be my problem? So I thought, maybe I'll change my goal. Rather than try to get them to do what I want, I could change my goal. One, I could exercise. So I could go for a hike or swim or exercise, or I could work on a book or a chapter or read something. If I change my goal, I change my emotion. Emotions are tied to goals. Anger is tied to revenge. Loneliness is tied to connecting. Anxiety is tied to trying to avoid a threat. But what if I change my goal? What if my goal was simply mindful awareness of my breath? Or what if my goal was my cat right over here, Katie, sitting on the chair sleeping, who doesn't have any of these emotion problems? What if my goal was simply to pet my cat? So my emotions may change with the goals that I have. So emotions have intention. In other words, intention here means they're aimed towards something. They're focused on a goal. What is the goal that this emotion is focused on? The anger is focused on revenge. What if I change that goal and then carry out an experiment? When I focus on this different goal, my work, or taking care of my children, or my pets, or my friends, or going for a walk, or reading a book, or listening to music, when I change my goal, maybe my emotion changes. And doesn't that tell me I have some control over that emotion? We often have expectations that things should go a certain way. In the past 2 years, we've had to change our expectation because we had a worldwide pandemic where millions of people died. 1 million people in the United States have died from COVID. We had to practice wearing masks, getting vaccinations, distancing from other people, working remotely. We had to change our expectations. Think about the refugee experience. All of these expectations, where I live, who I'm with, my job, my money, my city, my country, my freedom of movement. I have to change all those expectations. What we know for people coping with trauma is, this is the research by George Bonanno that published recently, that people who use many different techniques to cope with trauma are the ones who do best. In other words, there's not one technique that works for everybody. So our lecturers, our people who are giving presentations, have described a whole range of techniques. We have interpersonal psychotherapy, we have mindfulness, we have motivational interviewing, we have cognitive restructuring, we have acceptance, we have dialectical behavior therapy, we have so many different techniques. And the interesting thing is everybody who presents is going to say, this is what you need to do. But we all know that there are a lot of things that you can do. And if you have expectations that I can be flexible, like with pandemic, I can work from home, I can wear a mask, I can have Zoom talks, I can connect with people all over the world on Zoom, I can listen to music, I can learn a new skill, I can read a book, I can write a book, I can take a walk. You know, if I change my expectations, I'm going to have much better chance of coping with trauma. If I think, what are some techniques that I could use? As many techniques as possible, and being as flexible. If one thing doesn't work, try something else. That's what we know helps with trauma. There's not one approach that's necessary. We can talk about expression, that some people are afraid of talking about their feelings. They're afraid they're going to feel worse. And in fact, when you initially talk about your sadness, you're feeling worse right now, because it's so accessible, it's so real. But we know once people express their emotions and they feel understood, they begin making sense of things. They begin thinking, yeah, I can see why I feel that way. And by the way, this person seems to validate me. So we can think about the patient's theory of change. And this is something that I think is so key in therapy in general. So some people have what we call overgeneralized thinking. How do I change my emotion? Well, I need to change my entire life. How do you change your entire life? Well, it's hard to say. A different way of thinking about change might be to specify a behavior or a situation. So maybe what I need to change what I'm doing. Maybe I could focus on some productive activities, or I could focus on pleasurable things that I could enjoy doing, or I could learn a new skill, I could learn a new language, I could seek out people who are part of my community. In most countries, when you have a large number of immigrants who arrive, they form communities. Like in the United States, over the last 140 years, you would have areas where all the Irish would live, or all the Polish would live, or all the Italians would live, or all the Jewish people would live. They would form neighborhoods and communities, and they would connect. They would, there would be like a little Odessa in Brooklyn. There would be places where people can connect to other people through churches or synagogues or organizations. So thinking about, what can I do rather than change my entire life? Some people think about their emotions as fixed or stable, that I'm sad, I'll always be sad, versus I can feel my emotions are variable. The growth idea that Carol Dweck talks about, that I can think about my emotions as changeable. I can feel sad right now, but I might be able to feel other things in the future. We want to move people more toward this growth model about how my emotions can change. We'll save some time toward the end for questions. So if you have questions or comments, please put them in chat. And if they're in Polish or Ukrainian, the translators can translate them for me. So some people have a theory of change that I need to understand my past, how I got this way, what my parents did to me. That's probably not going to be helpful for people going through the trauma of war, going back to their childhood. It has to be more here and now. Or some people think it's genetics or brain chemistry. Now, medication could be helpful for some refugees going through a hard time. But it could be that the situation and how we respond to it makes a difference. Most people, an overwhelmingly high percentage of people exposed to a traumatic event, never developed post-traumatic stress disorder. Keep that in mind. An overwhelming percentage of people exposed to a traumatic event do not develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So what do people think about change? Some people think, why should I change? That's an important, why should I have to do anything? I'm a victim. It's true. I mean, you didn't deserve this. This is something that was malicious and evil that happened to you, not because you did anything. But some people think about change like, what will happen? What will help me change? Blaming other people, blaming myself, that's not going to help you change. Seeking support, that could help. Validation, that could help. Ruminating, that's not going to help. Changing your goals, that could help. Avoiding or escaping, probably not going to help now. Thinking about it differently, normalizing it, those can help. Having compassion for myself. And you can see where we have things like using drugs or alcohol or purging or cutting, whatever, those are problematic. So we have a whole range of theories about change. And we want to find out what would have to happen for you to feel better. And what do you do to help you cope? Do you use drugs and alcohol? Do you binge on food? Do you isolate? What do you do? That's going to be important. So these are the things I described before, and these ones in blue and gray are the ones that are helpful, social support and thinking about it differently and problem solving. So the emotion regulation strategies are a key thing. And we always start with, what are the emotions that you're trying to cope with? Because it's important to think about, what are you trying to do? What emotions are you trying to decrease or increase? And it's important for the individual to realize the validation part that I mentioned, that your emotions make sense. I keep coming back to validating and normalizing, because it's not like you do this in the first session and then never do it again. I try to do this in every session. Normalize and validate. It's truly an awful time. It's truly an awful time. If this is not what's awful, what is awful? This is awful. And the way you feel feels awful. Almost everyone feels the way that you feel. Look around you at all the people crying, suffering, confused, depressed, sad, angry. This is the emotional experience that you all share. And we share with you. We share with you. We want to hear that. We want to know how you feel. Tell us how you feel. It means that you feel these feelings, means that you're in contact with reality. This is reality. Please feel free to put some of your comments or questions into the chat function on the bottom of the page. So, emotions are linked to values, and a lot of this comes from the work by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Frankl. Frankl was a psychoanalyst and was a prisoner in Auschwitz, and he survived. And when he got out of Auschwitz, he wrote a book, which the English translation was Man's Search for Meaning, but the German title was Life in a Concentration Camp. And what Frankl argued is that we have to think about man has a need for meaning. And meaning is why live? Why go on living? And many of you may have clients who think my life is not worth living now. I've lost my husband, maybe I've lost my children. Man's search for meaning. And our colleague Corey Newman will be speaking about suicide risk in a couple of weeks, I believe. But we all need meaning. And what Frankl found is the people who were able to survive, because some people just gave up in the concentration camp and just simply died, not because they were murdered. Of course, millions were murdered, but some just gave up. And what he noticed is that the people who seemed to survive believed they had something to look forward to. Maybe I'll be reunited with my husband and wife. Maybe I'll be reunited with my children. Maybe I'll make a contribution. Maybe I'll get out and I'll fight fascism. So the people who survived had something to live for after. What does a refugee have to live for after? What do the 85 million refugees and displaced people worldwide, what do they have to live for after? What could happen in the future? So a lot of our emotions are linked to things we value. One is patriotism. And I can tell you that in America, and I think throughout the world, that we are all so impressed with the courage and the patriotism of the Ukrainian people. Absolutely incredible. Unbelievable, the patriotism. And your emotions are linked to protecting your family and your loved ones. Those matter. Those matter. Your emotions are linked to justice. Your emotions are linked to honor. Your emotions are linked to what's valuable in your life. Where if you experience loss, you experience value. But because you valued something that you've lost, we want to make sure you understand that you are the person who will make something valuable in the future. You are somebody, if you lost somebody you loved, you are still a loving person. you were still a loving person. We often think our emotions are going to be permanent, but what we know is that we're really bad at predicting emotions. We think, oh, I'll be really sad and hopeless for the next 20 years. But we're really bad at, this is what the research shows. We're terrible at predicting both negative and positive emotions. A lot of times our emotions are anchored to how we currently feel. So we currently feel sad. So we think we'll always feel sad. It's like we're looking at our future from the point of view of only this current emotion. We have a hard time imagining how we can cope in the future. But think about all the things that you could do in the future. You could return to Ukraine. You could rebuild a home. You could rebuild a country. You could stay in Poland. You could go to Germany. You can go to the United Kingdom. You could go to Spain. You can go to Canada, the United States, Australia. So there are many different futures that are possible. We want to generate that idea of possibility. We want to say yes to the future, not the idea that I'm trapped by the way I currently feel. So what opportunities could develop in the future? Sometimes it's hard to even imagine, but use your imagination. I remember at a conference I was at a few years ago in Europe, and there were a number of Iranians who came up to me, men and women, and they would set aside and they would say, Bob, can you tell me how I can move to the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or the United Kingdom, as if somehow I am the immigration department for the English-speaking world. So, and in fact, what's interesting is that one of them now is in Toronto, Canada. Another one is in Australia. So people do move on from difficult situations. They move on, and some return. And governments that are in power now, like in Russia, may not always be in power. So we want to be able to expand those emotions, not just fear and sadness, but compassion and love. Get in touch with the love and compassion that Paul Gilbert has described in his lecture. An appreciation for life. When you face death, you can appreciate you're alive. If you come close to dying, it makes you aware of how fragile and how arbitrary life can be. You can have a sense of pride in the things that your countrymen have done and countrywomen have done. You can feel loved and respected worldwide, because I can tell you that the world stands in awe of the people of Ukraine and of Poland and the people who are helping. We think you are the heroes of our time. Emotions are one step at a time. It's trauma, sadness, anxiety, hopelessness, hope, courage, love. One step at a time. Where are you on these steps? In which direction do you want to go? We often feel that emotions are permanent, but sometimes they're just simply the step to the next emotion. Think about step after step. If you think about your emotions as a step along a journey, following a sequence, anxious, numb, sad, angry, challenged, as a series of chapters. Which chapter are you in now? The chapter of trauma and war. But what is the next chapter in your life? What will that be? And will you be the author? Will you write that chapter? Start writing it. What do you want that next chapter to be? That's taking charge of your life. And when you take charge of your life, you're going to have different emotions. Think about right now, you're feeling hopeless. What are you feeling hopeless about? That you'll never feel happy, you'll never return to your home, never have work again? Well, I can tell you that Europe and North America needs workers, and maybe those jobs could be yours, or maybe you could return to your land. Wars come to an end. Even the worst war, World War II, after 6 years came to an end. 35,000 people died every day in World War II for 6 years. What are some ways you could be happy again in the future? Making new friends, loving again, finding new work. What's life going to be like after the invasion? If you are alive, will you still have family and friends? Some won't, many will. What will you look forward to in the future? How have others coped with occupation? You know, the world, I'm so astounded, 85 million refugees 2 years ago. And that's pretty constant. What can you do? You're not helpless. You can take care of yourself. That's your full-time job, taking care of yourself. You can take care of loved ones. They need you. And your loved ones are not the only people you can take care of. You can take care of strangers. You can fight back if possible. And I know many of you are. You can rebuild your country. And I know that you will. You have a great leader. What you've shown the world, in my view, is courage. We stand in awe of you. You should be proud that you are Ukrainian. You should be proud that you're Polish helping the Ukrainians. You've shown the world your honor. You've shown the world your humanity. You've shown the world your compassion. And you've shown the world what it is to fight for freedom. You have become the leaders of the world, the moral leaders of the world, the heart of the world. You are the vision of the future. Putin is not the vision of the future. You are. What's going to happen to Russia? Who knows? I think it's going to be guilt and shame. It's not like a lot of Germans feel proud of their Nazi past. They will be rejected worldwide by the free world. It's unfortunate, perhaps, because there are many decent Russians. But that's their leader, that's their country, that's their army, and they are going to have to deal with the consequences. What are they going to tell their children about Ukraine? That they invaded innocent people who had family members in Russia, and we went out and we killed them and destroyed their cities. How are they going to justify that? They will live with shame for generations, and the Ukrainian people will live with pride and courage and the respect of the world. What will Russia do when Putin is eliminated? He's not going to live forever. What will they do? At some point, Ukraine, I think, will be free. I hope so. I know how hard the Ukrainians have been fighting, and they will continue fighting. And the whole world is watching. I want to thank you for giving me this chance to share my ideas. It's a little that I can do. It's only a small gesture. Because those of you who are working directly with refugees deserve our gratitude forever. Thank you so much. And I think we have a few minutes now for the chat. So can somebody help me with the Polish?
Ja pomogę.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you
I
so
will.
much.
I will definitely help you.
Thank you.
So we have a question from a participant from Ukraine. What to do if it is difficult for a human being to understand emotions and cannot verbalize them, cannot put them into words?
Very interesting, hard to put into words. that, you know, one way to get in contact with emotion is to make a gesture. So, for example, if you were angry, you might make the gesture like this. If you wanted help, you might say this. If you wanted to be loved, you might say this. If you felt confused, you might say this. So if you were to show what we call a nonverbal expression of emotion, what would it be? The other is to give examples of where you see people going through the emotions that you have, to find the words. See what he was feeling or she was feeling, that's what I'm feeling. Any other comments or thoughts that people have? I think most of this looks like it's in.
Tak, jest
Post.
takie bardzo długie pytanie.
Oh, yes, we do have some questions. Actually, a longish one there is.
Okay.
From Gabriela. Emotions versus children's relationships to parents. Many refugees found themselves under completely new circumstances out of their own country, waged by war. Does the fact that the parent can actually read and interpret the emotions of the child helps in building child-parent relationships?
Right.
Is it actually the case that the ability of reading children's emotions, does it play an important role? And if so, how much is it important in building the relationships, in building closeness, sense of intimacy? What's the meaning of that in a future life, the mature life of children? And additional question, should children actually talk to children about emotions, explain those emotions to them? Does it have an impact on the child's life? If it introduces something, what is that?
Okay. Excellent question. So there's actually research on what's called emotion socialization, in other words, how do parents talk about emotion with children? And there are different styles that parents have. So some parents are dismissive of children's emotion. They'll say, don't worry, everything will be fine. That sounds reassuring, but what it basically says is, let's not talk about the emotion, let's get past it. That dismissive style. Others are critical, that you should be grown up, you shouldn't cry, you're a boy, you should act like a man or whatever, being critical of the emotion. And that has a very bad effect. And a lot of this work has been done by John Gottman and by Nancy Eisenberg. And what we know is that the more the parents sound like Carl Rogers, the better. You know, if you say to your child, I can see the validation part, I can see that you're upset, and tell me what you're feeling and what made you upset, and I'm here for you. I want to hear about all the feelings you have. I can understand why you're upset. Are there things that I can do to help? Are there things that you could do to help? And what we know is that parents who talk in this kind of encouraging, warm, accepting, validating style, their children are less upset, they're more able to cope with their emotions, and they get along with their friends better. Because you can imagine if the child is overwhelmed with emotion, they don't know what to do with it. But if they have a parent who wants to hear about the emotion, wants to explore the emotion, helps label the emotion. And they also found that in research by Dr. Keltner at University of California, at Berkeley, and people elsewhere, that families that talk about emotions, develop a vocabulary of emotion, that the children are better able to cope with their emotions. So part of it is developing what we might call emotional intelligence, like knowing that that's my emotion, I can express it, I can get validation, it's normal, I can tolerate mixed feelings, all of that. Think about parent-child, always about attachment. Think about John Bowlby. Think about your baby. You hug the baby, reassure the baby. You pick up the baby when it's crying. You don't say, I'll wait till you stop crying. You pick up the baby when it's crying. And the research shows, the infant parent research shows, that parents who respond to the baby crying have babies who cry less. Is there one last question or comment? Thank you, Gabrielle.
Jest też takie pytanie, jak pomóc, jeżeli mamy osobę, która nie...
Yes, there was one more question. How to help a person who doesn't accept their emotions?
Right, I see that. Yes, thank you for that. Well, I think about dealing with emotion as a series of steps. So the first step for this person is, I cannot accept my emotion. So we can accept that as a therapist. I can accept you don't accept that emotion. That's certainly, you're right. It sounds like that's a emotion that you just don't want to have, and you want to get rid of it. Can you tell me more about why you'd want to get rid of that emotion? What would happen if you kind of made room for it? Like, I have a lot of furniture in our apartment, and I could put another thing in the apartment. Maybe I can make room for it. What would happen if you made room for that? In other words, they may not want to accept the emotion, but they can talk about the emotion. And as they talk about the emotion, they're, at least for this moment, accepting it because it's there. So I want to thank you for having me, and I hope you got some useful ideas. And if you want to get in touch with me, please send me an email or whatever. And again, I want to thank you, because I think the feeling that all the speakers have, Inga, and your colleagues, all the speakers feel, what can I do? What can I do to help? Anything. What can I do? And so you've given me the opportunity to feel like I can do something, even if it's a small thing to do. And someday I'll return to Poland and see you in person again, and hope to see Inga and her husband and her sons, and Asha and Magda and all my other friends there. So I'm completely on your side, and I can tell you the world is on your side. The free world is on your side. The dictators are not.
Dziękujemy bardzo. Ja osobiście dziękuję za połączenie
Yes,
emocji.
and we thank you. Thanks particularly for making a connection between higher values and emotions. That was an incredible experience today. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Take care of yourself, my friend.
We'd
I'm
also
thinking
like,
about you. Be well.
Za pozornie mały krok.
yes, and we'd like to thank you for this, well, seemingly tiny step. For us, it's a huge leap ahead. And by the way, there's a request for your email. If you don't mind, I will provide your email on the chat, since you said that
Sure.
people can't contact you. Again, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
And
And
I've
thank
got
you.
just
What's
these
that,
are
Inga?
facts.
I'm sorry?
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
All right. Thank you so much,
for
Inga.
your support, for
Have
being
a
with
good
us
evening. Be well.
and your work. Thanks. Ja już wysyłam, już sekundkę, już tylko znajdę ten mailik do pana profesora. I już zaraz będę go przekazywać państwu. Muszę tutaj wejść. Jeszcze sekunda.